Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Everlasting Veteran Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Landry. I'm joined in studio with Nick O'Kelly. I hope I pronounced that right. It's very simple, but welcome to the show, man. I'm glad that we're able to connect so quickly, and I hope be able to get you actually in studio. But we'll start off with this. Tell us a little bit about you, your time in service, and where you've grown from after that.
Yeah, for sure. First, thanks for having me, man. I'm pumped to be here. So I was one of those kids that went to college and didn't really have a place in college. I kind of went off the rails, got bad grades, and drank my way into the decision to drop out, and then eventually join the army. So I grew up in Western Washington, and I enlisted in the army in 2010 as an 18 X-ray, which is a special forces recruit. So the reason I did that was because I just wanted to do something that I'd go in and be proud of, challenge myself and kind of push it and see if I had what it takes. My recruiter definitely cautioned me that most people don't make it, and that's the fastest path to get to the 82nd and be in the infantry. So I was aware of that, but I just believed in myself and knew I had what it took. So yeah, I entered the 18 X-ray program, went to Benning, did the full old basic training, infantry basic training and all that. And then went to airborne and then followed on to Bragg and did the whole special forces selection, special forces Q course, which we can get into more later, but I'll just give you the brief summary of my career now. So after the Q course, graduated as an 18 Charlie with as a Korean speaker, which led me to getting out to Okinawa. So first battalion out there, and I spent about 3 years on an ODA, just traveling all around Asia, which was really cool. Got to see a whole different side of the world. And then my son was born in 2014, and that kind of brought me to the realization that if I stayed in special forces long term, what does my family life look like? Because I looked at a lot of the senior guys and I didn't really want that. It was one of those things you have to be all in on the career, and your family sacrifices pretty significantly for that. So I went back to the drawing board, looked at my options, and I decided to drop a flight school packet and go try to be an Army helicopter pilot. So about 2015 is when I left Okinawa and then went to Fort Rucker, Alabama to start my flight school training journey, which was about 2 years. So I ended up leaving. I graduated flight school as a Black Hawk pilot, and then ended up going to 3rd Combat Aviation Brigade in 2017. The beauty of that is 3rd Cav was deploying to Afghanistan right away after a few months of being there. So I was able to greatly accelerate my flight career, like as far as accumulating hours and things like that, and kind of progressing as a new pilot. So once I got to a point, though, in Afghanistan, morale was pretty low, to be honest. We were in a pretty, I guess, tough spot in our unit. Nobody was really happy, including myself. So I was of the mindset that I need to continue to get myself out of this situation. I need to do something to get myself out of this. So about 3/4 of the way done with that deployment, I dropped my packet to go to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. For those of you that don't know, they are the elite aviation unit in the military, really. Top tier helicopter pilots. All the movies that have the SEALs or Green Berets are typically 160th are the guys flying them. So that was my next step. So at the end of that deployment, I got invited to go assess for the 160th because I had met their minimum hour requirements and all of that. And then I was fortunate because my assessment date was about 2 months after that deployment. So anyone out there that's deployed, typically on a deployment, you're going to the gym a lot. And as a helicopter pilot, you're in the aircraft almost every day. So repetition, and pair that with being in great physical shape. It was the perfect kind of segue to go do that. So long story short, I successfully assessed and then went to PCS to Fort Campbell, did all the 160th training, and then got orders back to Savannah, Georgia to go fly for 3rd Battalion in the 160th. So I flew for them for a few years, and then we'll get into it later, but eventually led to a medical retirement after a couple of years in the 160th. It was a long journey to kind of figure out what was going on with me, but the final diagnosis was anxiety with panic disorder. So it was one of those things that I didn't want to admit it, but that's what it ended up being. And that led me, to a medical retirement. So, and now we live in Charlotte, North Carolina. Fortunately, the medical board process was long enough for me that I was able to get civilian certifications and set myself up for success post-military. So when I got out, I wanted to be a financial advisor. So that was kind of I was always a closet finance nerd, and that was kind of the decision I made. So, which was great because this is a career that allows me to have freedom of time, and actually give back to my family, and which the military, as doesn't do very well. So yeah, that's where I'm at now. Now I own a financial planning firm in Charlotte, serving veterans, which I love because it keeps me in the community, and allows me to use my knowledge to help veterans. So that's kind of the long and short of it, but that's where we're at now from point A to point B.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's start unpacking that because, a lot of people you talked about, you did this, you're here for a couple years and everything else, but that's a decade or more of, experience going on. Right. And, you touched on a little bit of as far as senior leaders and, having a kid and, life's course kind of changed a little bit. Learning how to adapt with that a little bit better, family, work, life balance type of thing, which is very difficult in the military. And I find that it becomes even more difficult or challenging. We create some barriers for ourselves getting out, trying to figure out, you hear it a lot of times, right? The hot topics of, refining your identity, who you are, your purpose and everything else. But not enough gets talked about of how do you get there, right? How do you regain your identity for what you think is you, right? Not what other people are telling you. And then in turn, regaining that purpose again where you feel life has meaning again, you know? So many times, and we've had side conversation about this of the darkness, right? That's how we kind of explain it as the veteran community of the darkness. When it sets in, there's no instructional booklet of how to get out, right?
Yeah.
There's no scientific, or battle buddy system that has it where you do these 3 steps, right? And you're good to go, right?
Right.
Everybody's transition, everybody's life, story getting out and then what you're faced with varies, right? The
Yep.
challenges that, we face getting out varies. And I think that, we need to get into more of a mindset of, okay, the TAP program is what it is. You write a resume, send some applications out, but it's not a transition, right?
Right. Right.
The civilian world, you can put a 2-week notice in, set yourself up at your other job, and then you have a start date, right?
Yep.
You can't
Yep.
tell DOD I'm giving my 2-week notice, right?
Yeah.
And
Good
and,
point.
and set your set yourself up, right? Almost everywhere won't hire you, or maybe there's a conditional offer on the table, but you need that DD 214, the exit paperwork to say you're separated from service in order to come on board, and start a new career and a new life path and stuff like that. And I think that's where the majority of the challenges, right, is
Yeah.
how do you reintegrate, you know, service members getting out of service back into the civilian world. And that's a loaded statement right there.
It is.
Um, it's not just, you know, write a resume and apply, right? When we've talked about, and I've talked about before, of using those descriptive words that showcase you to your best of your ability, that commanders and first sergeants and beyond, have written in for either awards, your duties and responsibilities of going above and beyond, your leadership skills, everything, the whole 9 yards needs to go into that translation, right? Because I'm not going to put, I'll put on there that, I'm a 13 Delta, right? How
Right.
many civilian jobs are going to be like, oh man, we want that 13 Delta? You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't happen, you know?
Yeah.
And but I think some of it is education on the civilian side for these potential employers, and also more education and preparation for the exiting service member. And those two things together only really happens when people sit down and the conversation really starts happening of how to change the exiting, the transition for the service member. Um, we're not there yet,
Right.
so
Yeah.
the onus is going to be on us, right? We
Yeah.
become our own section leader, we become our own commander, we become our own first sergeant, and you have to advocate for yourself,
Yes.
and have the self growth moments, right? Where we're reassessing and doing our monthly evaluations on ourselves. If something's not working, where is it that we need to grow? Where is it? Is it personal? Is it mental? Is it professional? And it comes down to us. We're the only ones that can do it for us. And
Yep.
that wraps into that self-care.
Yeah. And on that note, that's a great point, and that's so true. And one of the most difficult things, but also most beneficial things that I did during my transition was starting to reach out and network to people on LinkedIn who were in either the industry I was trying to go to or an industry I was curious about. Because, well, first of all, I was shocked at how many people were open to connecting and actually engaging with me, because I had all this head trash that while we're in the military, we're taught to not use social media for the most part. And social media is kind of one of those taboo things that you try to stay off of and keep a low profile. So it was a mindset shift for me, for sure, to really get the courage to actually reach out to these people I didn't know. But that was one of the most beneficial things I did. And even in the resume writing portion, I had people who were willing to look over my resume, and come to find out, the one that the Army created for me through the SFL TAP program was essentially an OER, with some twists, right? So
Right, right.
all the guys I sent it to on the civilian side were, I mean, they basically said what you said, like you put 18 Charlie or 13 Delta or whatever on a resume. They have no idea what that means, and that doesn't translate to what they're looking for. So that was extremely helpful for me. That was probably the number one thing that I did that set me up for success as far as like meeting people and getting a job in the area and field I was trying to get into. So yeah, that
Right.
was definitely something that's underutilized that I highly recommend people do.
Yeah. Well, you just talked about, right, the digital footprint, right?
Yeah.
And, we're taught, we were taught to, not have as much of a digital footprint. If you have social media accounts, like you're very regulated on what you can post, how you can post it, when you can post it, all this other stuff.
Yep.
Um, but there's not, I teach it now with, this power program that I do, professional workforce readiness. The digital footprint is so important as far as people, employers or networking, people finding you and knowing about you, right? Before even that can lead to a conversation of maybe there's a job that you have no idea that's out there. And they go, oh man, look at this. The LinkedIn is, very much so a professional profile where it gives a little bit more than the resume, a little bit more
Yeah.
than words on a piece of paper. And I mean, you can do it with other platforms as well. But most of the time when you're making those connections, the algorithms, I believe, are a little bit different. It's triggering into titles in which you're putting on, that social media account. And people have to understand it. It still is social media, right?
Right. Yep.
But when you post stuff, when you change jobs, when I took this new job that I have now, there was so much more so many more jobs in a director, associate director world, right? And connections and stuff like that that kind of triggered the algorithm,
Yeah.
and you know, networking is so crucial no matter what you're doing. If you're already in a job, networking is so crucial for opportunity, right?
Yes.
And
Exactly.
that's how you create the opportunities, right? And there's work that's involved with it, but when you're genuine and true to yourself, right, and you're a good human being and you're networking, for opportunities, like keeping that open mind, you may have a specific niche that you're trying to connect with people, like for instance a podcast, right? So I'm trying to look at profiles, see, who's relatable, who can bring perspective, and I do a reach out, right?
Yep.
The same thing happens when it's potential employers, right? They're going to see a profile, they're going to see what's on there, and the chances are you may land something without even having to apply, like through Indeed or through Monster. I don't even know if they have Monster
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
That was what was around when I was getting out, right?
Yep.
You do this, lack of a better terms, this BS, resume,
Yep.
and you start applying on monster.com,
Right.
and it's very, very commercialized, right? At least with Indeed, you can build a profile in there, and if there's employers that are looking for, certain individuals, they pay for, X amount for the account, and they can actually do reach outs and stuff like that, so it's a little bit better,
Yeah.
but those lessons don't happen, coming out of the military of, all right, now you know, you're getting to the point where you need to create your digital footprint. That doesn't happen overnight either, you know,
Right. For sure.
and, I think that the education needs to start, when you get in service, right? Because they spend all this time, money, and effort breaking you down from your civilian life, getting into the military, training you to be a soldier, sailor, marine, whatever, and then your job skill set. The amount of time, money, and effort they do that needs to be the same coming out,
Right. I
you
agree.
know?
Yeah. Yeah,
But
and they're getting, I will say, at least in the special operations community, they're getting a lot better at it. Like they're creating these exfil programs. I don't know what it's called in the other branches, but it's basically the last year you go to a different company, like a exfil company essentially,
right,
and they give you that space to get out. So hopefully the rest of the military is kind of looking at that and taking notes, because we need it. We need that runway to, one, figure out who we are again,
right,
and then
yeah,
two, figure out what's going to be the best for me and my family after that I'm going to enjoy, and I'm not going
right,
to just go just to get a paycheck. I'm actually going to enjoy it.
right. Yeah, and I've talked about that before too. Is I had the current base commander on, and David Marquette on. We talked about that exfil, right? That transition point of service members really need to be like rear detachment. Like your mission readiness is now the transition, right? Your mission, like when I was getting out of active duty, up until like my 2 weeks before I was like turning everything in, I was still going to the field, right?
Yeah.
And
Jeez.
we're going to the field almost every other weekend, and there's no time other than doing a checklist that they give you with this folder. Go over to S1, go over to turn your equipment in, pack up your stuff, get it ready for. And mind you, I ETS'd out of regular army from Germany, right? So I'm not
Oh
even
yeah.
back stateside. And originally what happened was I had orders to go to 101st. I had like a year and a half left on my contract. This was back when they did the involuntary separations due to economic reasons.
Oh yeah.
So I had a year and a half left on my contract. I'm like, I had orders in hand that said I'm PCSing, right, to Campbell. And they changed my ETS by 365 days, and then only showed 3 months to get out and figure it out from overseas, right?
Man.
Right. And it was like in an instance, the next day, first sergeant pulls me in and goes, "Hey, your orders are gone and you're ETSing." Like it was like
Wow,
that overnight. One day I had orders. The next day it said you're getting out. So
man.
then I had to go over to the National Guard recruiter because I'm like, well, just in case, I need to go active guard to give myself time. Let me, re-enlist National Guard. And that's not an easy process either, right?
Yeah,
Depending on your MOS, I'm in Rhode Island for Rhode Island Guard because that was the closest for artillery, right? I couldn't even pick Connecticut, so
jeez.
I get hired by the police department after about 6.5 months after active duty. Go to the police academy, start with the department. I was there for 11 and a half years up until about 5 years ago or 5 months ago. And, but from 2012 to 2017, I was still drilling, right? And I was working midnights, get off 7 a.m., drive an hour and a half to my unit, drill for the day, drive
Man.
home, maybe get a couple hours of sleep or sleep in my truck there and drive straight to work. Take vacation time when we had like the 2 weeks to go up and
Yeah.
go shoot the guns in Vermont, New Hampshire, or whatever, and rinse and repeat, right? And I'm like, what am I doing? Right? I'm getting
Yeah.
paid like $173 for the weekend, to
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
drill. I'm paying more in gas than I am actually getting you know, from drill. Um, and I'm a walking zombie, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and there was zero exit for like the VA. There was zero anything like, filing claims, follow ups, anything like that. PACT Act wasn't out yet. Even when I got done, because I think what PACT Act came out 2019 or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't even know, but
So I completely got done in 2017. That's not out yet. I'm one of those veterans, like, I don't need it, somebody else needs it, I'm
yeah,
good, whatever. Still hawking up, a lung to this day, from it breathing everything in Afghanistan. And then the PACT Act comes out and this spiral effect happens, right? Of, all right, I'll try again, because I originally tried applying the VA by myself,
yeah, yeah,
navigated online and stuff. I'm like, let me go to a VSO and they should know how to get this done properly.
right.
Fast forward to present day. I didn't realize how banged up my body is, all the
Yeah,
medical, mental, all that kind of stuff. Those little things adds weight onto our shoulders, right?
absolutely.
And when we don't know exactly what it is and we're trying to figure it out, we're trying to fix it, right? And we don't have the answers, it becomes frustrating, right?
Yep,
And then that's when we start diving into that dark times because we
exactly.
can't fix it. We don't know
Yep,
what's going on. We don't know where to turn. We think it's all us, and then becomes an inward, right, trajectory towards ourselves that we're a fuck up. We
yep,
can't figure it out. How did I get to this point? I was, you know, getting an AAM at least once a year, on active duty. I was, a sergeant, a section leader. Like, how did I get to this point? Right.
yeah, yep,
And you feel lost. Right.
yeah,
And every time, the voices stop talking, um, you're alone by yourself. Those intrusive thoughts catapult us into destruction,
absolutely.
you
And we
know?
blame ourselves for it too, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And we don't know how to, we're ashamed, right?
Yep,
We're
yep,
ashamed. We don't know how to explain what's going on. Everything's just effed up, right? I don't know how to
yep,
fix it. You can't fix me, and you have this outward hatred now towards others, right? Your
yep,
interactions with people, loved ones, everything else is just an outward destruction trajectory you're putting yourself on when, yes, that's true. They don't know how to help because we don't want to talk about it.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you really like get to the point where you feel like a shell of yourself, like something's wrong. You're not willing to really admit it even to yourself, even though you know it's going on. And at least in my experience, I was going through all the motions and doing everything right, on the outside, but man, I was just a walking zombie, walking high performing zombie, essentially, you
Right.
know, and until I actually like got a name for it and started getting the help. And then I got my life back and got my sense of purpose back, like you were talking about, which is really like everything in life. That's
Right.
what drives us to do anything. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's very true.
Yeah. And like before, so I started kind of on the self-care journey a little bit before like I started Everlasting Veteran. Everlasting Veteran was kind of a catapult um to continue that, but also help others in the same at the same time.
Yeah.
Through conversation and everything. And it wasn't until I did an episode with Rob Sweetman, um, retired Navy SEAL, is dubbed the Sleep Genie. Um, he's getting stuff passed through Congress, like really putting in the work, right? It wasn't until I did an episode with him, and I was still working midnights at the time, doing the podcasting and everything else. And I would talk to him even offline after the episode, and everything boils down to sleep, right?
Yeah.
We don't realize how crucial it is, our thought process, our mental clarity. I mean, I've been running, I enlisted in Space Force, have my CPAP now, and I've been running okay, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to lie to myself, and make it fluff and make it be like everything's good. It's
Right.
not. I still
Yeah.
have those not so good days. I still have those days I can't get to sleep or I'm not getting good sleep.
Yep.
Um, it's a tool, right? It's a tool to aid me in continuing personal care, right? And it's a
Exactly.
continued evolving thing. Like there's not one thing that's going to be boom, everything's good, and you have to continue to put the work in,
You do.
and I wasn't in that like kind of mindset. I was in that, um, fix it right now type of mindset before kind of I started this journey, mental health, um, physical, mental, like the whole nine yards. So fast forward, Everlasting Veteran's been running, operating for about 2 years now. And so about 2.5 years of VA appointments. I ended up having to take intermittent FMLA with work as a police officer. They were coming at me for using sick time for my doctor's appointments, time I've earned.
Jesus. Yeah.
So talk about kind of the catalyst that breaks culture, morale and climate and everything else. The culture and climate of organizations. When people are focusing on like self improvement and care, the vitals to mission readiness and being the best version of yourself that you can be,
Yep.
especially in policing, and the military, where you got to watch your six yourself sometimes, and you got to do it for the person to your left and your right, right? And if you're off, right, lives are put at risk, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Split second decisions, you know, uh, and when you're messing up, right, then that happens with everybody. You start second guessing yourself, right, and that's when
Yeah.
people get hurt, you
Yeah.
know, and it's a terrible feeling to not have that support, right? When you're reaching out, it almost reaffirms a stigma, right?
Right. Exactly. It does. It
You
it
know,
makes you feel like you're messed up, right? Like you're crazy. You're the only one going through something, and it's not okay to get help or to speak up about it. And that's so dangerous, man.
yeah, it is. And the thing is with that too is like, organizations, and police departments aren't the only exception. This happens everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Is, when we care for each other, being a good human being, right? And, when something's off, right? the onus is on us too to say something to that person, right? That
Yeah.
uncomfortable conversation that nobody wants to have, right? Maybe they're
Yep.
not, suicidal or have ideations in that moment, right? But if you're like, yeah, they're off for like weeks or months,
Yeah.
or you just see this full path of destruction starting to form, and people are pushing people away. They're giving stuff away. They're all these quote red flags, right?
Yeah.
Um, if we paid attention and attentively listened before all that stuff happened, right? We can open up to the conversation in that human moment and build that
Exactly.
connection before it starts snowballing.
Yeah. And that's all it takes sometimes, is one person being willing to listen to what's going on. Obviously, like you said, though, the onus is still on us to be willing to open those doors, because that's scary as well. Like that was my biggest struggle, was just really just being honest about it. I didn't want to admit it. I did not want anybody to know what was going on, because I was scared of all the repercussions of what could potentially happen, right? I catastrophized everything in my head, that this was literally the end of my career if something happened. Um, Ironically, yes, it ended up being that, but there's a lot more that goes into that. And it is a blessing in disguise now that I'm on the other side of it, because I got through that darkness, which if I was still there today, I would not be the same person I am right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I
yeah.
think some of that too is like, if you think about it like a roadmap, you know, is we take a left, like a familiar area that, you grew up in or where you live, right? You can almost blindfold, right, yourself and drive around, right? And
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm going to go shopping. I'm going to take this left, this right, and there's times where I'd be coming home from work and I'm all of a sudden in my driveway and I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't remember getting here, you know?
Yep.
Um, and it's that the human mind overtaking, all of either the PTSD or moments or, struggles and suppressing it to the point where you can just function. Your body and your mind is trying to protect you, right? And those cues, right? When we pick up on them, we have to really like knuckle down, figure out why it's happening, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
we have to start listening to our mind and our bodies, right? When moments like that happen, as much as they're scary and we may joke about it, I must have
Yeah.
been sleep driving,
Yeah.
like I did it, in the cruiser a lot, right? Sleep deprived. I'm working midnights. You come up with like these excuses, right? But
Right.
then you have these moments like, you have time off and it happens more frequently, right? And it continues to happen. It gets worse, right?
Yep.
And I still have those moments, right? I still have those moments, and a lot of what I've been told from doctors and stuff has to do with my PTSD, right?
Mhm.
And, the mind is still trying to figure it out, right?
Right.
There's a lot that goes into receptors and smells and tastes and everything else. Um, they boil it down to triggers, right?
Yeah.
Um, the mind is a computer processor in this dark place and relies on everything else to tell it what's going on around
Yeah.
it. And if we take a moment and we slow things down, right? We have these great sayings in the military, and but we don't use them when we get out, right? Slow
I
is
know.
smooth, smooth is fast, right?
Yeah.
We just want to get a result, right? We just
Yep.
want to sprint to the finish line, and we think if we get there things are going to get better,
Right.
right? And it's a
Yep.
false reality we create for ourselves, I feel sometimes.
Yeah, it's a rat race. It's an endless loop that's never going to end, because there's always something more. There's always something more, which it's a great personality trait to strive for something more, right? But when it's at the detriment of your mental health and you're simply pushing to the next level just to achieve more so that you can run away from your mental health issues, which is what I was doing. I was trying to change my situation for the better so that hopefully I would get better, and I wasn't really addressing what was actually going on. And it wasn't fixing the problem. Like, it gave me a target, but it really didn't address what was going on. So it never actually fixed what was going on. And we're all guilty of that.
Right. Yeah, and it's that hyper focus, right? We hyper focus on something that gives us that dopamine dump.
Yep.
We hyper focus on something that um it basically drowns out so we can ignore the real issue, right? Because we don't want to get that thought that, we're less of a person because of it. Um if I say this, it's going to label me in a certain way, to people that I care about, and
Yeah.
maybe they're not going to be there, right? All these questions go through your head, right? And it prevents us from actually like addressing what's going on with us for self improvement, and I strongly agree that, and I say this so often, that self improvement is not a monetary thing, right? The wealth, they say wealth of knowledge, right?
Yep.
um Wealth of knowledge, right? There's no monetary thing that comes on the wealth of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Your wealth that you give to yourself, um you know it's not something where, like, okay, I'm making, 6+ figures a year, and I'm okay. No,
Right.
you're lying to yourself,
Yeah.
like, the money aspect to it, only makes it worse sometimes, I believe, because you're like, why am I still feeling like this? Why am I still going through this? I have everything. I have all the
Yeah.
money. I have the cars, the toys, and everything else. It's because you hyper focused on the wrong thing, right?
Exactly. And you start, so I went through that actually, not necessarily on the money side, right? But I was, when I was in that storm, in that dark place, it was I had a perfect life from the outside, right? Like, beautiful wife, two awesome young kids with, the white picket fence, the whole deal. You know what I mean? I
Right.
was a stud in the army, like doing really well in flight school. So I would do that. I would be like, what is wrong with me? Like, I have everything. How the hell is it possible that I'm feeling this way? And I like hated myself for it, Like, I was so mad at myself for being in this situation, even though looking from the outside in, like, I had everything going for me. So yeah, you nailed it on the head right there. It's so true. We become our own worst enemy, and we end up like resenting ourselves for it and actually being mad at ourselves, which makes it even worse. It digs
Yeah.
us deeper.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
that self guilt and self ridicule,
Yeah.
right? And it's unfair, right, to do it to ourselves. And we beat ourselves up too often. Um, and we I used to do this a lot too, is you project all this positive out, right? And
Yeah.
you try to
Yep.
mask what's actually going on. And at the end of the day, like, the conversations are done, you're not around your friends, you're isolating, and you sit there, and all those intrusive thoughts start pouring back in again, right?
Yep.
Nobody wants to be around you. Nobody likes you. Nobody, can see your perspective. They don't understand me, right? They don't
Yep.
understand what I'm going through. Yeah, maybe they went through it, but they're not going through it like me. You shelter yourself on this island, right? Where, and that's why I bring all different walks of life on this show, because the perspective that somebody else can give, whether they're in the military or not, um, perspective on life, if we just listen to each other, you may not exactly walked in the person's shoes, but that perspective may trigger, a positive mindset shift, right?
Yeah.
Where, man, I didn't think of it that way, right? Because, and we had this conversation sitting down and putting headphones on and slowing your thoughts down, slowing your sentences down. I have a tendency sometimes to like ramble, right? And I talk a lot, right? And I understand that. And it's one of those things that I try to work on. right? But I didn't start working on it until I accepted that it was true,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
I didn't bring myself to that level of acceptance for myself, right?
Yep.
And that's just one example. There's multiple different examples of acceptance, right? To be able to allow yourself to understand yourself better. And when you're listening to other people, actively listening attentively, then you can realize that it's advice. It's not ridicule, right?
Yes,
And
exactly.
that advice, right? It may be hard to hear sometimes, but it comes from, a warm, good place, and not getting offended when somebody tells you, hey, you got to fix this, right? Your first reaction is going to be like, I'm not fucked up. I don't know what you're talking about, right?
Yep.
Like now you get offended, right? You go on the defense, right? How dare you tell me this? Why don't you look at your life? How many conversations have you had?
Yeah.
Like people do it all the time.
Yep.
They don't break it down, right? They don't break it down. They don't listen. Seek, um, they don't seek the help in a positive way, right? They either go through the motions just to please somebody else, right? They're not
Yep.
doing it for themselves because they don't want to accept that it's not them, right? It's everybody
Right.
else, right?
Right.
That level of acceptance, I think, is so crucial in getting through any type of barriers that a lot of times we create ourselves. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
those barriers, and I broke it down a few episodes back, like all the lessons we learned, like growing up, and we had the saying in the military, break it down Barney style, right?
Yep.
What about Sesame Street's lessons, right? You got Elmo trying to go through the double doors, and it's an obstacle, right? He goes over, under, or through. There's multiple different ways, right, to be able to get through something, right? And there's multiple different answers to get you to where you want to be.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's where it doesn't, there's no textbook for it that in life, right? Of instructions or a roadmap, right?
yeah.
And using those simple lessons.
Yeah, especially when it comes to this stuff, the mental health stuff, right? Like it's it's getting better, right? We're getting more resources and platforms like yours that are actually like talking about it, which is awesome. It's so freaking awesome to see. I was guilty of being like sheltered from this in the military, like when I was active duty, I wasn't really like listening to veteran podcasts and veteran focused things, right? Until I got
Right.
out and became a veteran. So that's kind of a weird thing that I never thought about. But yeah, you're right, man. Like, so even like my situation, I'm going to keep going back to it because it is important. I was suicidal for, I mean, 4 years straight. And then it morphed into these like anxiety spells, excuse me, and like physical symptoms. But I literally did not get out of that darkness and out of that hole until I started accepting it, until I had a name for what it was and finally was like, all right, like this is it, as much as I don't want to admit it, this is what's going on. And yeah, man, that's when I started coming back down the other side of the mountain. Like it's mind blowing that it was that simple or seems that simple, but that is what really changed my course. And yeah, to your point, man, you nailed it. It's so true.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
hard to accept, it's hard to accept because you don't
Oh,
want to.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
And
don't
I
want to
think,
be that
I
guy.
think one of the other things too, not just acceptance, but we overthink it sometimes. Like
Yeah.
we go down that rabbit hole of how many people have like Googled, right?
Yep.
WebMD self-diagnosis, right?
Yes.
And you look
Yes.
for the most positive one, right? And it's not even close to like what's going on. And you're like, oh, I have that. And you
Yeah,
know,
exactly. Or you
self
got the opposite where somebody looks at the worst one and they're like, "I am dying tomorrow."
yeah, right.
Like
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
crazy.
it's stuff like that where that's self-destructing in itself too, because you're still trying to ignore, right?
Yep.
The level of acceptance isn't happening at all, right?
Yeah.
You're still trying to um circumvent actually seeking
Yeah.
help. right?
Yep.
And figuring it out yourself, right? And
Yep.
no one person has completely figured it out. Let's just put it out there, right?
Yep.
I was church this morning, and Pastor Zach, I don't know. Every time he goes up there, I connect with him. He breaks it. We have a big military population here, so
Nice.
and I've sat down with him before, during my journeys and get perspective, right? And I don't preach, you know, my faith or tell everybody like that's your end all. That's just my personal thing, right?
Yep.
But he was saying today, he's like, we sit here and it goes to the tangible stuff, right? That hyper focus on the money and having this and messages that you want to put out, where, you have to do this and this is the answer to, the problem. And he actually like used like Jocko, and
Nice.
other like major, podcasts for the military community connecting with it. And there are a lot of people, right, that they will hyper focus on listening to one individual that person has all the answers for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it really like kind of hit me. What I try to do, and I've talked to you about it before. I've listened to little snippets, on those short, reels or whatever of other
Yep.
podcasts because it's on social media. I have not like gone on and like listen. I'm not a listening podcaster, right? I don't I don't know. My mind, I guess like I'm more of like a squirrel, like, I like kind of just navigating life as it comes at me, you know?
Yeah.
And for me, when I started podcasting, right? Um I looked at it like this is if I go down this kind of rabbit hole of listening to others that have been deemed, the expert and have all the answers, then I'd start comparing myself, right? Of I'm not as good as them, right?
Yeah.
I'm not, and start going back down that kind of rabbit hole of darkness,
Yep.
Whereas if I just owned everything that I did, right? Whether somebody else thinks it's good or bad, right? It doesn't matter. I'm putting out what I feel in the most genuine way, right? With anybody that wants to partake, and
Yeah.
have a conversation, you know?
Yeah.
Um if you look at some of and those little short snippet videos, you see them like reading off a paper or whatever the case may be. And I told you this when we kind of talked a little bit is like I'm a open conversation type of person, right?
Yeah.
It's more natural, you
It's
know?
better.
M
Way
maybe
better. Yep.
yeah, maybe I'll write down a couple talking points, right? Stuff's pertinent. We didn't do it for this, right? We had a
Yep.
conversation, for the conversation today, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
I feel like it's more natural that way, and it goes back to kind of, building rapport, right? The interview type of techniques, like that get used in either policing or I&I type of classes and stuff like that. If everybody kind of educated themselves and there was classes available for that, right? In, transition out of the military, right?
Yeah.
Or any role where like communications key, you don't have to be in communications, right? As a
Yeah.
field.
Yep.
Um, but networking, being able to have a conversation to see what others are going through, right? And you start
Yep.
realizing we're more relatable,
Oh
right? Than
yeah.
you think, you
Oh
know?
yeah. Yep. It's just a matter of getting the balls to talk about it, and be
Yeah.
honest about things. Like, but you're right. That when you actually open up and start talking about things, and this isn't even just mental health, this is anything, right? Like, whatever you got, financial issues, whatever it is, like, you realize there's other people in the same boat. You can have those conversations, and it's not as scary at that point once you realize, like, oh shit, like I'm not the only one. This is fairly normal, even though I feel like it wasn't before I said something. So
Right.
yeah, it's so much value to that, just
Yeah.
networking and talking, just candidly with people.
Yeah. Well, and then a lot of those too, people don't realize this until like it becomes a problem, right? We don't want to we don't focus on it because we tend to take things for granted when things are running smoothly and things are good and it's not deemed a problem in our eyes, right?
Right.
But you play a crucial role in the financial aspect because that can add stress when it becomes a problem, right?
Oh yeah.
That can
Oh
lead
yeah.
that can lead to financial stuff can lead to homelessness, right? That can lead to self-doubt, suicidal ideations,
Yeah.
all those components are main tiers, right, of going into that darkness, right?
Yeah.
And having the conversations, right, whether you're seeking professional help financially or any type of help, it doesn't have to necessarily be, deemed professional and help
Right.
and have to set up a meeting, a 30-second or 30-minute
Yeah.
type of
A
strategy
consult.
call,
Yeah.
console, whatever the case may be, just talking to other people of, hey, I'm struggling with this. Have you ever experienced this before? Right.
Yeah. Yep.
And you notice the language I use. I'm struggling with this. Have you ever experienced this? How many different ways that one sentence, that question, can you apply it to in life?
Almost every facet of life. You
Almost
know,
every facet.
parenting, being a spouse, going to work, anything. Yeah, you're right. That's such a great phrase to have in your toolbox.
Yeah.
Yeah, any facet for
Yeah.
sure.
And it's one of those things where it it simplifies it, right?
Yeah.
It's a so I use this other thing. I picked it up along the way. It's called the Control Alt Delete method. And I connected with it. One, love acronyms. That's one thing I absolutely love. I love creating acronyms at work for stuff. I just know that I love acronyms and that's how I learn to remember things.
Yeah.
So Control Alt Delete, as you can imagine, it's your keyboard, right? That's telling your computer to stop, right? Processing,
Yeah.
controlling yourself, altering your mindset, and deleting the negativity, right? And
Cool.
I started using that, even small stuff to bigger stuff to life altering, changes, career path changes, and it's allowed me to slow things down, right? Where it becomes manageable in my
Yeah.
wheelhouse. Keyword manageable, right?
Yep.
There's no perfect solution. There's no answer that I'm going to be able to give to say, do steps 1, 2, and 3, and you'll be fine, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a continuous management of life's expectations, right?
Yep.
Not the expectations people put on you. It's managing your own expectations going into a new job, coming out of the military, right? And one of the biggest things is understanding and managing that expectation that nobody in the civilian world is going to understand military acronyms. You go from one job to another. Their acronyms, if they use them, is going to be drastically different. It may mean something else, right?
Yep.
So that in that aspect, again, the onus is on us to manage those expectations getting out. And manage, I thought going into policing, they're telling me paramilitary structure, all this, it's a load of crap. The only thing that kind of is the same is, rank, right? Sergeant,
Yeah.
lieutenant, captain, chief, right? And it's like, a police department of like 100 people is basically a platoon. Your chief is, your commander,
Yeah.
down to your sergeant and lieutenants are, the E5 and the E6 of the section, right?
Okay.
And then your captain oversees, different departments vary depending on how
Yeah.
big they are, how many sergeants or lieutenants or captains there are. New York's huge, right?
Yeah.
So you have
Yeah.
multiple precincts, you have multiple sergeants, multiple lieutenants, so on and so forth. So the perspective on size of department is also going to vary as well. And each department's policies or acronyms or whatever the case may be is going to vary as well because
Yeah.
there's no one oversight, right, standard that's coming down from the federal government throughout municipalities or even state police they vary based on state law, right? It's not like if you go from Campbell to Vilseck, Germany, you're still having the same, ARs,
Right.
Army regulations, stuff like
Yep.
that. The transition from a unit to a different unit is going to be fairly similar. There may be a couple things here and there that change a little bit,
Yeah.
but you don't have as many variables that are going to
Yep.
change, right? So going from like the military to policing, right? I tell you, I struggled with it a little bit, right? Because tactics, stuff you're taught in the military, right? Everything has a trickle down effect from the military into municipalities and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
I went off of what, I was trained, how to hold a rifle, how to do this, how to,
Yeah.
magazine reloads, stuff like that, right? And I don't claim to be, any type of, world renowned operator, John Wick style, but
Right.
I have good tactics, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right? And
Yeah.
I work in my wheelhouse, work in my working space. I know what I know and I don't know what I don't know, right?
Right.
And I'm new to the department. You get told don't do it that way, that's the wrong way. And you're like, what?
Oh man,
Right?
that would be
From
tough.
somebody that's like never served in the military, right? For example,
Yeah.
right? But they say they've gone through XYZ training, and that's what they were taught, right?
Hmm.
Does it make them wrong? Does it make me wrong? Right?
Yeah. That would
But
be tough.
you sit there and you scratch your head and you go, I literally just got off active duty. I got hired with them July 2013. I just got off active duty October 2012.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like a 6.5 month or whatever time period and I'm still National Guard at this point now. Like I'm 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Like, and you're telling me that the military screwed up? That's how I took it. Right.
Right. I would
Like,
too. Yeah.
our tactics aren't good enough for, what we're doing here, you know?
Yeah.
But, and like I said, I'm not, I don't claim to be an expert in anything. If there's something new, right? But it kind of opened my eyes when I did some training with, the state police SWAT team and stuff
Oh yeah.
is so I applied what I know. Right. And they're like, dude, awesome job. Like, we don't even have to like tell you like what to do. Right. Because they get trained, by military units. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's a
You
different
know,
tier of what they're getting, right?
right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
their experience is, a lot more. Right. And they even say, like, hey, we're open to, if there's something, they can pick up and put in their toolbox. Right. It's that open mind thinking,
Yeah. Yep.
and we have to do the point of this long ass story that I have right now. The point of that in its entirety, not just as veterans, but as people, is if we just open our minds to be able to take a little bit, it's like becoming a leader in the military or wherever else. You take the best pieces that you want to apply to your leadership style, right? And
Yes.
you take the negative stuff and you kind of throw it out the window. You don't forget about it, but you throw it out
Yeah.
the window. You don't want that, right?
Right.
So we got to do the same thing as veterans is we take the good, right? We recognize what the bad is so we don't repeat the same mistake, right?
Yeah.
But we listen and we take in as much information as possible and understand that it will evolve, right? Don't get so stuck in your ways,
Yeah.
right? You can't teach me, type of
Right.
mentality, you know? And
Right.
it's we all have done it at some point or another, right? And we're
Yeah.
all guilty of it sometimes still, right? But recognizing and accepting, right? Back to the acceptance that hey, sorry, I got in my own way,
Yeah.
right? I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready to listen. We don't want to
Right.
apologize, right? Because then it showcases that we're wrong, and we don't want to be wrong.
Of
You know
course.
what I mean?
Of course we don't want to be wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. We got
Yeah.
all the answers all the time. Nobody can
Yeah.
teach us anything, and we'll just cast ourselves to our lonely island to be able to figure it out ourselves. You
Yeah.
know?
Yep. Yeah, man, that's a good point. A lot of so I actually spoke to somebody last week who hires at like one of the big banks here in Charlotte. And he was he's a veteran too, and he was talking to me about like senior officers coming to apply for jobs, right? And kind of thinking that they have a golden ticket because they've done these senior positions in the military. But he put it in perspective for me. He was like, if you talk to a full bird colonel, and he's trying to come into, let's just say, a COO job or something like that at a corporation, and you ask him all these civilian acronyms, right, or financial acronyms, accounting acronyms, he's not going to know what they are. He's not going to understand them. Where
Mm.
there's another candidate who's potentially, been being groomed for this for the last 10, 15 years and is very familiar with that company's system. So it's hard to accept that as veterans, right? Because we live in our bubble in the military. So it's hard to accept what we don't know,
Right.
especially when we are coming from a position of being very comfortable, very, very good at what we do, and then having to go into a whole different world. But you're right, like accepting and having the humility to say, all right, like I don't know everything. I'm going to take the good from my military experience and I can add to your organization or whatever you're doing with the good, and I'm going to learn, what I don't know, but I'm willing to learn that, I
Right.
don't have all the answers, like, but it all comes down to just accepting that, and understanding that that's the case.
Right.
Because yeah, there's a lot of veterans that fall into the trap where they get into the civilian world and they just get pissed off at everything that's happening because it's either inefficient, right? It's pro or reactive instead of proactive. And there's a lot of things that we in the military are fortunate to have been trained on and seen. And that's not the case in the civilian world. So yeah, be aware of that. Like just be okay with it and be willing to improve it when you can. I think that's probably the best way to like go about that,
Right. Yeah,
because
and I mean, it all comes down to that management of expectations, you
yeah,
know,
exactly.
and there's some big bold statements, that back to like Jocko, right,
Yeah.
and extreme ownership, right,
Yes, it's
and
huge. Got that
that
book right there.
yeah, extreme ownership is one of the big things, and back to that conversation about these platforms that was talked about this morning, and people have to understand that you can adapt it into your life how you see fit, right?
Right.
How you adapt it into your life may vary depending on what you're going through, and everybody's life is different, right? So that's where there's no textbook answer that says 2 plus 2 is 4, you know,
Right.
and it evolves based on the needs, right? The needs of the veteran, the needs of success, the needs and success, not in a monetary sense, right?
Yeah.
The success of your new mission, right? Your new mission outside of the military, and not letting go of those great character attributes that are instilled in you in the military. Those can flow back. Those can flow into the civilian world. You know,
Oh yeah.
just because you're out, don't take a mental dump on the good stuff that they're looking for in leaders.
Yeah.
And one of the big one of the big things I've talked to some people about, and at first they were kind of taken back by it, because it was told to me. All right. So passing that information on, you don't have to be in a CEO, CFO, commanding position to be a leader. In
Right.
fact, you know, all a leader is a bunch of people that are willing to follow you,
Yeah.
right? Because they trust in your abilities. They trust in what you say, they trust in what you do, right? And that is the core root of a leader, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I started really honing in on this bosses versus leaders. Your boss is, going to tell you and give you a command directive, right,
Yep.
of what needs to get done, right? A leader is going to tell you and do it with you,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And maybe they don't have time to do it, but they're going to be there to help assess, and get the team through it, right?
Right.
And a boss
Yep.
is just going to point fingers when the task doesn't get done because they don't have the answers. They want you to
Yeah.
figure it out, right?
Yeah.
And understanding that the management expectations, right? when you get into the civilian world, right, you're going to have some people that are great leaders, right? The
Yep.
majority of the time, you're going to run into a lot of bosses, right?
Yes.
And the intent in which somebody has to obtain the level of success based on a title is going to vary, right?
Yeah,
If you
for
have
sure.
poor intent going for that promotion, right? You have poor intent. It comes down to that intent, the personal intent that you have stepping on somebody to get somewhere, right?
Right.
It has that turn your nose up smell to it, right? Of
Yep.
this shit stinks right now,
Yep.
right? This person is a terrible person. People see it, right?
Yeah.
But most often than not, nobody has, the cojones to be like, hey, like, this is what you're doing. We see it, right?
Right.
They just kind of
Yeah.
brush it off and they keep going, and they don't call out, right, the person when they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
And it needs to not be looked at as like, I'm trying to take a dig at you because you're doing something screw. It's constructive criticism, right?
Yeah. It should be. Yeah. Yeah.
And like, for instance, if you take an example of like two candidates, right? And on paper, you're looking for somebody that's going to be able to, oversee a company, has that leadership skills, everything else, everything's right on par with each other. This resume, and these two people, and they interview exactly the same. They pretty much have the exact same answers, right? But the intent that the person has when they're going through the motions, and if it's picked up on, right, there needs to be a conversation with that person, you know?
Yeah. Totally
And
agree.
I feel like those types of people that look at it creates a oh, what's it called? A
Toxic.
toxicity. Yeah, it creates that. But that's a poison, right? And if you don't
Right.
remove the poison, you can't move forward, right?
Yep.
Type of thing. But it's oh my god, awesome brain fart, mid
Yeah.
episode.
Right.
Gotta love that, But it creates a work environment, right, where it is damaging to the culture. It's
Yeah.
damaging to the climate, the morale, like everything else. Like, and I've ran into a lot of people that they think that, they have this mindset of a bottom up mentality, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's never going to work, right?
Right.
Because people that are in the positions of top, right? People look to them because they're in that position, and they look for key directives, kind of being pushed down. Um, that bottom up mentality, right, is not ever going to work, you know,
Yeah.
especially like, say I had a company, I hire you, you've never been, in that field before, and I go, all right, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And
Good
you
luck.
go, I
Yeah.
just got here. What am I
Yeah.
doing? You know what I mean?
For real.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things that a lot of people, they understand that it doesn't work now. They've tried it, right?
Right.
And there's certain stuff that you probably shouldn't, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah.
Type of
Yep.
thing. Um, but it does create a toxic environment, in a workplace. And it's so damaging. Um, it's so damaging to the overall success
Yeah.
of the group.
Yeah. Because it deconstructs a team, when you got Lone Rangers, is what we call them, obviously. But it's just, if you have those Lone Rangers running around trying to just do everything themselves or for their own glory, if you will, like that's not a team. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
everybody's going to start either trying to keep up with that guy so that they can still be, eligible for promotions or whatever, or they're just going to start hating that guy, and it's just, yeah, that creates the toxicity. So I think it all, like you said, the bosses versus leaders, like it all comes back to the extreme ownership. Like that's the biggest difference between bosses and leaders is a leader will stand up for his guys when his guys make mistakes and say, hey, that's on me because I didn't do this, right? And a boss would
Right.
be like, you suck, you didn't meet this timeline, what's wrong with you, right?
Right.
Instead of looking inward and saying, what could I have done to enable my people better? Like, yeah, that's really what it comes down to, is
Yeah.
just owning it and
Yeah.
standing up for your guys, you know?
Right. Yeah. And the thought came in mind, the narcissism in a workplace. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah,
Uh,
perfect. Yep.
yeah,
Perfect.
narcissism in a workplace. Obviously there's the clinical narcissist, which, you typically don't know when you run into them because they go undiagnosed.
Yeah.
But,
They
but nar-
well, they do CrossFit and tell you about it. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Oh man, all those CrossFit people out there are extremely hurt right now.
I used to do CrossFit, so
Yeah.
I get
No,
it.
what everybody kind of jokes about that. And the CrossFit once, you lose friends, due to
Yeah.
CrossFit because they just go into this CrossFit,
World, yeah.
extravaganza world of utopia. And like if you're not CrossFit, you ain't shit, right?
Yeah.
Like
How many burpees did you do today, bro?
yeah, right. And you get these world of like, people that are counting their steps and everything else, and the CrossFit people, and then I love the continued bathroom selfie posts, after the gym, and
Yeah.
it's like you just see all the stall doors open. I'm like, wow, that's a good look.
Yeah. I
you
know. It's
know?
like, why? Why?
Yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah. It's a self-absorbed thing, right? So
Yeah.
i- I've taken a lot of dives into like, I don't have a degree in psychology or anything like that. And but I do my own like research of why, right? Why people tick, right? That's
Right.
kind of a field that's always been intriguing to me. Why I do things the way I do, what catapults you into a certain direction based on scenario X, right? And a lot of times it comes down to, especially with the social media platforms, a lot of people look for the engagement, right? And
Yeah.
they're in a darker place, and if they don't get the engagement, they got to keep putting something up there that you're allowing society to mold you versus you molding yourself into what you want to be in society. Really, what it
Yeah.
comes down to. And I see a lot of those times, like um, even before I started Everlasting Veteran, like I would post, on Facebook or whatever, like you know a post like here and there, like over months, right? And then like my social media platforms I use for business, and I started this like good morning post, more of a outward trajectory to anybody that wants to listen. Good morning with a short sentence of like some type of inspirational thing, and um, because affirmations are so key, right, to ourselves, but also like it helps trigger other people to get into that positive mindset, right? And if the one thing you start, your day with is something positive, right? Whether people look at it or not, I don't care. But if I say good morning, and that is, my first positive thing to start my day out, I'll end the day positive, right?
Yeah.
And
Isn't that wild?
that's a
It's
mindset thing, right? Of
yeah.
continuing to stay in the realm of positivity, right? There's going to be negative shit along the way, right? It's going to happen. We don't have biggest thing is we want to try to control all the variables in life. And when we can't control it, that's when we lose control.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you're right, man. The little things go such a long way. Like I have a very strict morning routine. And when I don't follow it, my day is significantly different, and it's noticeably different, even though that routine's only, 30 minutes of my day. It's mind blowing how much that little bit makes such a huge difference and huge impact on, yeah, the rest of that entire day.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, I can't remember the commander's name. You may be able to remember. I believe he was giving a speech. It was some academy graduation. I think it was the Naval Academy.
Yeah, making the bed one.
Yes.
Yeah,
And you get up, with a purpose, you fold your corners, and you make your bed. You start your day off with something that you accomplished. Nobody else did
yeah,
it for you, and the simplicity of that. And I actually tasked somebody with that. They came to me, they're kind of going like a little sideways, and life was like hitting them from all different angles, that feeling of I
yep,
just can't do anything right. I said, well, why don't you take the next 3 days every time you get up? Yeah, like, and I showed him that video, and I said, why don't you take like the next 3 days, or even try for a week, right? And put yourself to task, right? And do it every morning, right? And if there's nothing else that you get accomplished in the day, right? And this goes back to the guy's speech, you accomplished at least one thing. You made your
Yeah.
bed, right?
Yeah.
And it's small, but it's not really that small, right? And that's why the military does it, in the still of discipline, right? To allow yourself to figure out how to give yourself structure when structure doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's good.
And that self-motivating structure that you provide to yourself in life is going to be the catalyst that sends you in whatever direction you want to bring yourself in a positive way. And I sometimes I get into those ruts, right? And I'm like, I don't want to do anything. I want to sit and watch TV. I want to sit, and
Right.
I have like this, routine of getting up and winding down the day and stuff like that. Cause I know I'm not 100% of being able to fall asleep when I want to,
Right.
staying asleep when I want to. I have severe sleep apnea. I think I stopped breathing like 47 something times an hour, you know.
Jeez.
Um, I vaguely remember going for the sleep study at the VA on the weekend, and the guy's like, "Hey, I'll only come in and put the mask on." They have all the leads. I felt like I was, the
Yeah.
about to be transported into an avatar's body, and
Yep.
I'll only come in and put the mask on because I have to wake a doctor up to get approval, if it's bad or whatever. And they send you through this 1980s video of what sleep apnea and insomnia and all this stuff is. They should really update that. But
Yeah, I know, right?
yeah. So long story short, at some point throughout the night, because the room, there's multiple rooms off of where like the central hub where they monitor you. There's cameras in the room so they can watch you and see all your readings. That room's lights don't go off, right? So at some point in the middle of the night, the door opens, there's a silhouette of the guy, and all I hear is, "Mr. Landry, gotta put the mask on." I'm like, "Oh, okay." He could have easily like robbed me for all my money, right?
Yeah, of course.
You
Yeah.
know, and I'm in this fog, right? And that night, and I don't even know how long I didn't even think to ask him how long was I asleep for with the mask on, like what time was it? Because that was the first time that I had a dream in 10 years. That was the
Wow.
first time I achieved REM sleep in almost 10 years.
Wow. That's
And
incredible.
yeah, and so there was a lot of times I would be like sitting in a cruiser, sitting at home, and I started like self-motivating journaling. Like
Yeah.
thought comes in the head, I write it down in my because you get the notes on your phone type of thing.
Right.
Um, when I started having like hallucinations of either hearing something or seeing something, and a lot of it came down to sleep deprivation. Those hallucinations, even when I'm driving and I thought like somebody or something, was in front of the car and it wasn't the case. And I'm like
Jeez.
automatically like slamming on the brakes, whatever, like heart racing, about to pop out my chest, like,
Yeah.
or like trying to fall asleep and I'm hearing those knocks, right?
Dang.
And I did an episode. I actually probably want to go back and do kind of like a part two to it. I labeled it the knock that gave them wings, and a lot of it came down to the knock on the door. Either being the person giving the message or receiving the message that your loved one isn't coming home.
Mm.
Um, in whatever aspect that it is, I left it very broad in that sense
Right.
of being the police officer, giving the notification, getting the phone call that another one of my brothers or sisters has committed suicide, being on the receiving end, but it's that knock, right, that gave them wings,
Yeah.
and I revert back to a lot of, and this is kind of like a personal growth thing of what I've talked about. trying to listen to it in an outside perspective of like what my mindset was in the time doing certain episodes.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I think the most importance comes down to, like video and audio, like podcasting, when it comes to like mental health and aiding in the growth, not just mental health, just personal and professional growth. It's a documentation of history, right? That brings us back to the moment when we're in that mindset, when we're in that moment, right? My first episode was What the Vet, you know,
Nice.
it was a play on like, what the fuck? Like
Yeah.
I get out, I'm a veteran, and I'm like, what the vet? Like
Yeah.
what is going on? Like
Yep.
nobody understands me. I'm struggling and want to scream and crawl out of my skin, and just everything is hitting you and there's nothing you can do about it because I don't know what to do, where to turn or anything like that. And
Yep.
my world is crumbling before me. And I want to reach out, but I can't
Right.
because the stigma, the self embarrassment you put on yourself, the labeling or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
Right. And as a police officer, even more so, right? I got PTSD, right? I got all these different ailments, right? My back, 7-pinch nerves, and I have a cyst on my back that they just found, right? And this is just recent.
Okay.
So like there's all these different things that I'm learning about myself, right? And if I found this out, I tell you this, if I found out like all this stuff on top of what I was going through in my dark times, between right after my daughter was born in 2017, and in that dark, very, very dark, I essentially blacked out of my life for a
Yeah.
couple of years,
I
right?
can relate to that. Yep.
And it, by I hate the sayings of like saving grace and all this other stuff because it truly is bullshit, right?
Yeah.
It comes down to us finally fighting for ourselves again,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And fighting in a positive way of I've got more.
Yep.
I've got more to give. I've got more to be a better person, right? And advocating and fighting for yourself is so crucial to allowing, you see all these photos of like, hand reaching down to grab another hand to help them up,
Right.
right? At the end of the day, I'm going to be real, is nobody's going to do it for you.
Yeah. Amen.
And you have to understand that nobody's going to do it for you. You
Yep.
have to put the work in. You
Yep.
have to be self-committed and be selfish. That's why self-care has self in it. You have to be selfish, right? And
Yeah.
put the work in yourself, right? A
Yeah.
lot of people I've talked to, not a lot of people, but some people I've talked to and I've had those conversations, right? And they're like, "Well, look at your life." Right? I'm like, "It's not perfect. What are you talking about?" Right?
Yeah.
I'm still growing, right?
Yeah.
I will not stop growing.
We all are. And to this selfish point, right? Because this is something that I struggled with. I viewed going to get help as being selfish because from the team point of view, right? Because especially as a pilot in like a small special operations unit, if you go on a downslip, like somebody else has to carry your weight. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I struggled with those stigmas to the max because of that. But then now looking back on it, man, it yes, selfish in the terms that I was the one that had to do it and make that decision, but also selfless because I have a family, that what would happen if they didn't have their dad or their husband, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's more than just about you.
Mhm.
So yes, selfish from that aspect, but it's also selfless. And one of the most selfless things you can do is go improve yourself, right? And improve your mental health or future by doing that and by accepting it and just laying down your pride for a couple months. you know
Yeah. Yeah, I have
yeah.
I have this thing I've been doing, when I started my mindset shift, and I want to be very clear to anybody that has talked about or heard about like mindset shift, because it can go negative, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That mindset shift, like when we go into those dark times, like we don't realize we're shifting our mind to think negative. We're
Yeah.
shifting our mind. There's a positive mindset shift and a negative mindset shift, right?
Yep.
And they're understanding both, right, is crucial, right? Because you need to know when something is not good for you, right? When something's negative. Um, I had this episode of all this caveats that we go through and the metaphors which are already all put in place. And I put somebody to the task. I said, hey, you should start, and they're like, you should start a board game or some type of thing of the metaphor sentence, right? Of you pick like 5 metaphors and try to complete a sentence with just metaphors, right?
Nice.
And I said to him, I said, we say all these types of metaphors, right? And that's our solution to like trying to help people, suck it up, buttercup, like,
Yeah.
um,
Rub some dirt on it.
rub some dirt on it,
Yeah.
Mind over matter, like all these metaphors of, some brilliant minds or people just going through it have come up with it, right? They're no different than us,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
We all struggle. When I say struggle, like there's no difference. Struggle is struggle. Success
Yep.
is success,
Yep.
right? And the variables, right? Focusing on what understanding what those variables are that you can control, right? And to not hyper focus on the ones you can't.
Right.
Because when you
Right.
hyper focus on the variables that you have zero control over, you lose control of yourself.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
for me, one of the toughest decisions, kind of, recently, obviously, was a career transition, right? The variable that I could control was where I was working and what I was doing, right?
Yeah.
We talked about that toxicity, right? And that poison, right? That if you can't remove it, you have to remove yourself, right? And doing that hard Control Alt Delete, right? And the only thing I could control, right, is changing careers.
Right.
Right? I couldn't run for the hills fast enough, right? Um, because I was eating myself alive inside, right? Of just trying to like figure out what's going on with me, right? And trying to do that self-help, and
Yeah.
reaching out for help and stuff like that. And it wasn't conducive to the environment I was in, right? So I had to make a change, you
Yeah.
know? And I had to have that discussion like with my wife, like, hey, I'm gonna end up rolling my pension, into retirement. I'm giving up a pension, right? Because you do 20 years and,
Yeah.
the pension's capped and stuff like that. And going through, the finances of what that's going to look like, right?
Right.
And, what that transition's going to look like, if I run into this, um, and just the uncertainty, right? Because as long as you show up, right, and you don't
Yeah.
do anything stupid, you pretty
Right.
much can just be present, right, and collect the pension.
Right.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So
Yep.
there's not a lot of especially when somebody's trying to grow personally and professionally, there's not a lot of a feel good with that, right?
Mm.
Um just show up,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like
It's pretty easy for
um
most people. Yeah.
yeah, pretty easy. And it brings me to my next point of we hear it so often is people say just show up and then you can figure it out. Like the first step is just showing up,
Yeah.
right? We forget to show up for ourselves,
Yeah. Oh yeah. We're the
right?
biggest. Yeah. We're our biggest enemies on that.
We forget to show up for ourselves, especially when it's those crucial pivotal moments to advocate for ourselves and say no, like you're wrong. This is who I am,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And when you show up, get ready to put the work in,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Exactly.
you have to be in the mindset of getting ready to put the work in, you know?
Yep.
And yeah, obviously seeking growth personally, right? And continuing to understand what's going through what you're going through and everything like that. Yeah, you have to show up to your doctor's appointments, right?
Right.
I'm not
Yeah.
talking about it in that aspect. I'm talking about showing up as a representation, of yourself, and what does that look like, right?
Yep.
That's where the lines kind of get gray, and there's no written answer in a textbook that I can say or anybody else can say that is going to say you're going to show up. Well, what do I do now? Right?
Right. Yeah.
When you show up, you have to have the answers into who you are, where you're at, and where you want to go.
Yeah.
And you have to be real with yourself. So often than not, I'm guilty of it too.
We all are.
We give
Yeah.
ourselves a false reality, right? Because we want to make it seem better than it is sometimes.
Yeah. Exactly. We're scared to face reality, right? That's really what it is. Or we
Yeah.
don't want to. Yeah.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
when we're slapped with reality, like we automatically either get defensive or take it negatively,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Of not looking at it as like a pivotal point of what I can do better,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Or we run to alcohol, right? And
Yeah.
try to mask it and numb the pain or numb the reality. Like I especially in the military community, we're all highly functioning alcoholics at one point of our lives.
That
and
is true.
and yeah, I know. And that was my first answer, right? It was just, hey, when I get a couple beers deep, like the depression's kind of gone. So it's kind of nice. But then you wake up the next day and it's back with a vengeance, and it's temporary.
Yeah.
And yeah, but
Yeah. And
that's too common.
it's crazy. So, I, so at service today, another thing that Pastor Zach said, um, he took a water bottle. He gave this example of, the water bottle of, you're in life, like you need to hydrate, right? And you take this out of a fridge and you put it on the counter and then start, condensation and stuff. The temporary like solution, right, to hydrate is going over and licking the condensation versus going to the source,
That's good.
right?
That's
And
good.
I'm like, man, like that's what I love about him. Like he breaks down like real
Yeah.
life stuff, and it's like we do that so often to ourselves, right? We try to put a band-aid on it, right?
Yep.
We try to find this temporary solution to just get us, one foot in front of the other, right?
Right.
And that's why I talk about like showing up is, get ready to put the work in,
Yeah.
right? Because nobody's going to do the work for you.
Yep.
Right? You may have good support, right? But the true work, especially when it comes to like mental health, it's a there's no science. Like there is, but there's no like science of like being able to read how my mind is able to process
Right.
and heal, right? There is science when it comes to somebody's involved in a traumatic incident
Right.
and you inject um a substance, alcohol, drugs, whatever, um, you know, immediately, right? You come back from deployment and we're sloshed, the first
Yeah.
30 days, right?
Yeah.
Um, you have some traumatic incident policing, and the first thing you do is you run and you go to the liquor store and you freaking, you pound down 3 beers because that was a freaking rough shift,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And, God forbid you firemen, first responder world's no different, right? And what happens is the mind can't heal
Yeah.
properly, can't process what was going on,
Right.
right? And it actually creates creates like glitches, right? I look at it, it creates glitches where that substance didn't allow you to heal, and process what's going on. And that's why you have a lot of veterans that come back from deployments and they say between like the 5 and 10 year window, things start surfacing,
Yeah.
right? Because that 5 to 10 year window, you know, you are self-destructing so much, right? That all of a sudden, right? It's always been there. It's just
Right. Exactly.
we've
Yep.
just been trying to ignore it,
Yep.
right? And then
Putting
it
it in the
becomes,
corner.
yeah, put it in the corner, and when we put it in the corner, once in a while we're feeding it, right?
Yep.
We're feeding it with the alcohol, we're feeding it with not seeking the help, not talking, right? And we're feeding it, right? It's that negative monster, right? That
Yeah.
just wants you to isolate, just wants you to distance, just wants you to pay attention to it and nothing
Right.
else.
Yep.
And so often than not, we're all guilty of it, right? I'm guilty of it too, right? Get back from deployment, maybe not to this extreme, but I can only speak from personal experience. We would grab a big handle of Jack Daniels,
Oh yeah.
and that bottle of Jack Daniels is done within a 6 hour period,
Yeah. It's
right?
insane.
And
Right.
it's
And
like,
yeah. And your tolerance is at an all-time low too. So
right,
it's yeah,
yeah, and
it's
you're
pretty significant.
yeah you're waking up with Sharpies written on your face because you fell asleep with your shoes on, right? And like the other people, aren't passed out yet. They're getting to where you're at, right? But they're still awake, right? And maybe you're in the lawn chair in their backyard and the sun's coming up, right? And
Yeah.
you're still drinking,
Yeah.
right? And
Crazy.
watching the sun come up, and you're like, oh, and then the only positive comes from it is the support, the camaraderie that comes out of it,
Right. Yep.
right? But in a sense, it's a negatively influenced camaraderie. It's a false reality that we're allowing each other to put ourselves in, right?
Yeah.
Where once in a while, yeah, I'm an advocate for this. You got to go, grab a beer, right?
Yeah.
Take a little edge off just to, dude. I feel like this morning, like the service was like 100% on like everything I talk about,
That's awesome.
because he says to me, or not just to me, everybody. I felt like he was talking to me, but he's like, how many times he goes around, when he was in college, and he was part of fraternity and he didn't drink. But how many people love talking about, Jesus when they started drinking? How many people build up that liquid courage, right?
Mm,
And they're able to talk about, right,
yeah.
that demon, right?
Right.
It's not until, you're 6, 8, 10, 12 drinks in, right? And then you're a emotional wreck, you're
Yep.
unstable, right? And you're not going to remember the conversation, but the
Exactly.
conversation comes up because the
Yep.
liquid courage allowed you to open up, right? And hopefully that other person is able to remember it, right?
Right.
Because then if they have enough cojones, they're going to the next day or a couple days later go, "Hey man, we need to talk.
Right. Exactly. You remember
Thank you for
talking about this. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for opening up to me.
For
You
sure.
know, let's have a conversation now about it."
Yeah.
Right? So it's a good and a bad, right?
I agree. No, I
It
agree. Yeah.
builds up that courage to be able to say something,
Yep.
but if it falls on deaf ears where nobody remembers the conversation and it's just chalked up to, we had to blow off some steam,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That dark monster is going to keep growing,
Yeah. Totally
because
agree.
because
Yep.
you're going to go, "Hey, when's everybody free? Let's go out on Saturday. When's everybody free? Let's go out during the work week." And
Yeah.
it turns into this evolving monster, right? That's now is affecting your livelihood,
Yeah.
right? Your wallet, um, your social life
Yep.
relies
Your
on it
s-
now.
your sleep.
Your
That's
sleep,
like yeah.
yeah. There's so many avenues, so many variables, and I like talking in variables, and I'm sure you get this.
Yeah.
Those variables that we can control in those instances, if we focus, and this is where hyper focus is a good thing. is you hyper focus on, let's make it more positive,
Yeah.
right? Let's not drink as much or not have anything at all. And let's still have that conversation. Let's blow off some steam and go to the range or go to the gym,
Yeah.
and let's have that conversation, have that dopamine dump, right? That feel good drug that our body just naturally produces, which is a phenomenal thing.
Yeah.
Let's have that dopamine dump, and let's, we talk about training scars, right? Let's not create a training scar, right? Let's create a positive reinforcement, right? You have the
Yeah.
dopamine dump and you have the conversation and you feel good about it. And it creates a positive mark, right? To stand on, right?
Yeah.
Moving forward,
Totally agree.
it's not easy.
No, and I think that's more of a cultural problem or thing that needs to be addressed than it is an individual, because that starts from just your team leader, your E4 team leader and his squad leader being able to say, "Hey, dude, like you should talk to Jimmy about this. I noticed on the deployment this happened. Like, go bring it up with him, just see what he thinks. It doesn't have to be like, hey, what's wrong with you? It can just be like,
Right.
hey, Jimmy, like, I know we went through this. Like, are you good from it? Or, you know what I mean? Like, that's all it needs to be. But it does, because the privates are not going to be the guys that are going to start that, culture shift. It needs to start from somewhere at that mid-tier level, which ultimately comes from the top. But yeah, it's a culture shift, just being okay with talking about real shit,
Right.
and even if it's socially drinking and talking about it, like that's better than not at all, right?
Right.
But yeah, I really see it as like a cultural problem in the military, because I mean, you were there, I was there. It was not something that people wanted to talk about,
Right.
because you're crazy if you talk about it, and
Right.
it's not cool. So
Yeah, yeah, the labels start getting slapped on,
yeah,
the interactions,
yep,
would change, all that kind of stuff. All the stuff that you don't want to happen, right?
right,
And then and then you bring it back to, I shouldn't have said anything. That, you put
yeah,
you put blame on yourself now, right?
yep,
That changed because, you opened your mouth, and we're trying to, you know, do something essentially that is positive, right?
yeah, for
You're not
sure,
getting the positive reinforcement. You know what I
right,
mean? And
yeah,
we, as humans, we do seek that. We do seek the positive reinforcement when we're doing stuff, and that's what makes us feel good about what we do.
yeah,
And if we don't have that positive reinforcement, right? When it's something that's crucial, right? When
yep,
it comes to like mental health,
yeah,
we don't have that positive reinforcement, people aren't going to come out and say something,
yep,
and that's
totally,
where that,
totally.
and that's, yeah, and that's where that, like, that culture shift, right? The climate of our culture is, it's getting better, I think,
It
right?
is, yeah,
But it takes conversations like this, where, maybe somebody hears or sees or whatever, somebody turns them on to like an episode like this where, they're not ready to really come out and do a face to face, right?
right, yep,
But they gain perspective from people that have been there or talking about it, and they realize that we're more alike,
yeah,
we have
right,
common ground to stand on, and there's people, you're not the only one, you know,
exactly, yep,
and what you're feeling, there's more people that think and feel what you feel on a daily basis than you know.
yeah,
You know?
right. You're not going crazy, and you're not alone, right? And one of the worst things you can do is stuff it deep inside and not address it, because it festers, it digs roots, and it becomes a much worse monster if you let it just continue to grow. So yeah, yeah, there's so much value to everything that we're talking about if people are willing to, learn from it and take action. Because worst, we can sit here all day and talk about it, right? But like ultimately, it does take action, take somebody taking action and getting the courage to talk about it.
Yeah.
All those stigmas out there, they're real, man, and they're tough to overcome. Like they they exist and they exist for a reason. But
Mhm.
like ultimately life and thriving and growth, like everything we're talking about, way more important than a stupid stigma,
Right.
than what somebody thinks about you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like as
Yeah.
hard as
And
that is.
yeah, and you can relate to this being a in the roto world and stuff. So the last episode I had Brandy Rector on. She's the CEO of Sky Hunter Outfitters and Fly, um,
Awesome.
Marine Corps door gunner. Then she went through like her trials and tribulations, struggles, and everything else. And ended up landing herself in Oklahoma and starting helicopter hog hunting company, turned into tours.
That's awesome.
And then she's partnered with Oklahoma University, does flight school, has a full veteran team, that are instructors and everything else. And one of the things that I obviously didn't think of because I've never flown a helicopter or plane or anything like that, but I do have an understanding of, your med cards and, being
Yeah.
clear to fly and, everything else. And, there's so many veterans like that, they actually will flag and pull you from being able to, operate in the civilian world, if you
Yep.
come out with disabilities from the military,
Yep.
and navigating that and everything else. And, her being an advocate for others, because, she's a combat vet as well. And, you know, uh, through the VA system. And a lot of times what happens is you don't end up seeking the help because, it's the livelihood, right? And there's
Yep.
there's there's so many hurdles that are created
Yeah.
of like you have to be a perfect person in order to continue and maintain, a profession, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
everything works, and this is where that broken systems come into play, right? The system works against, right? Um, the human aspect, right?
Right. It does.
And
Yep.
it doesn't matter if you're in the military or not, you have service or not, or you deployed or not, or anything like that. A civilian can have the same darkness,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Can have the same struggles, right? That we speak of. And it's so crucial for this system, right? The overall arching system of employment and mental health and all these systems that are deemed broken right now
Yeah.
because nobody wants to have that uncomfortable conversation,
Right.
right? They want to
Yep.
talk about it and raise awareness, but they don't have answers, solutions, and they don't want to be casted on their own little island if they fight for creating positive change.
Yeah.
You know?
That's such a good point, man, with the aviation side of it, the rotary wing side, whatever. It doesn't matter, any aviation, because you have like if you go on an SSRI or any sort of anti-anxiety, antidepressant medication, like you're grounded for I think it's 6 months initially just to see how the medication reacts, right? And then I'm pretty sure there's another few months even after that, like 6 months considers you stable on it, and then I think they monitor you even for another couple months. So like you're basically delaying your career potentially almost a year just by getting on a medication that's going to help you.
Right.
um and it makes it just exasperates all of those stigmas that we're talking about. Like they exist everywhere regardless.
Mhm.
But put on top of that, yeah, like somebody's planning on going to the airlines and flying commercially after their military career, like what do they do? Like they're in this deep dark space where they're literally scared of their thoughts, but they're also scared because they want to have a career for the next 20, 30 years. Like yeah, it's like an impossible situation that they're forced to be in. And fortunately I wasn't planning on flying after my career, so it made it a little bit easier. But still, I mean, I ended up getting permanently grounded like you said, so I can't fly anymore, even on the civilian side, because of what I went through. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to, companies and, you know, other agencies that, like, work with the government or, like, any type of like, even, like, big rigs, like tractor trailer driver,
Yeah.
they need their med
Yep.
cards and all that kinda stuff too. Um, medical evaluations and everything else. what it really comes down to, and I'm almost 100% positive on this. I'm pretty close to thinking that this is the root of the problem. It's easier for them to deem it a liability and not touch it
Yep.
and just say no,
Yep.
right? Versus actually fixing the broken
Yeah.
system,
And
right?
doing the work to figure out how to.
Yeah, and God forbid something happens because they try, to fix it, and it's not perfect yet. The reality of it, none of it's going to be perfect if you
Yeah.
get stuck in that. Well, this is another thing I hate and hated. This is how we've always done it.
That's the worst.
It's the
That's the
worst.
worst. Yeah.
And that would be repeated so often and not when nobody was willing, right, to step up and affect change.
Right.
Well,
Yep.
we've always done it this way. This is how we've always done it. It is the most idiotic thing
I agree.
to
Yeah.
be able to even say that statement, because it shows that you're not willing to have any type of forward progression, outside thinking, try anything new.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to is organizations or people in power, they're scared of
Yep.
change. They're
Yep.
scared.
And yeah. And they're very confident in that one way. Right.
Right.
So they don't want somebody else to know more than them or to have more experience with that than them in the new
Right.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. And it hinders some, and that's where that toxicity starts, settling in. Right.
Yeah.
And that's where culture and climate of an organization, and I say organizations as companies or
Yeah.
police departments or units in the military or whatever the case may be, governments, right?
Yeah.
You can really go down the rabbit hole of where is it broken, right? Everywhere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If we're not willing to change first and foremost for ourselves and the people that are around us that care about us and love us and we love them, right? And you get it stuck in that stubbornness of it's working for now, right? When is it not going to work anymore,
Yeah.
right? And
Exactly.
how much do you have to allow yourself to continue to struggle, right? Versus making it better, right? And
Yeah.
making life more enjoyable. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
All the stuff we're talking about, some of it's going to cost money on research and everything else, but when it comes down to a personal side of things, right? Of the individual,
Yeah.
it doesn't cost anything.
Exactly.
There's
Just
no
some balls,
yes.
That's
Yeah.
it. The courage to do it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And
yeah.
there's a few things that, I do stay true to. And it, like you've heard the saying, put your big girl and big boy pants on.
Yeah.
Right. If my 7-year-old, well, at the time she was 7, she's 9 now, but when I did a couple episodes and I did like thoughts of a 7-year-old, because she loves sitting down behind the mic and all this
That's
other stuff.
cool. I love that.
And it's a good like teaching aspect too.
Yeah.
But the first one, I sat down with her, and she's got like her own little mic now and her own little
Nice.
desk and everything, and she does like these whatever she wants to do, makeup or whatever the case may be.
That's
But I
awesome.
did thoughts of a 7-year-old, and I asked her like point blank adult questions, right? Of what do you think about the military?
Mhm.
What do you think about daddy in the military? Right? Very broad
In
question, right?
Yeah.
And her answer to me is well, you're in the military, and the military, protects us from evil, and the only way that we can combat evil is being kinder to each other.
Look at that,
And
man.
I'm
From a
like,
7-year-old.
from a 7-year-old, right?
It's amazing.
And we have to revert ourselves back to innocence,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Because a lot of times we forget like what is taught to us and what we're teaching our kids, but we don't do it ourselves.
Yep.
We
Yeah.
teach our kids to be kind, be a good person, like I rather them be the best person ever and everybody loves them and stuff like that. And when they're in their in our home, right, that's when things break down,
Yeah.
right?
Same. I always say that too. Yep.
Right, because that's where their comfort is. That's where their
Yeah.
support is. That's where we can work on things, right, and
Exactly. Yep.
get back to ground zero, right? So if we do that for our kids and our future, right, of this country and generations to come, why aren't we still doing it for ourselves?
Yeah.
You know what I
No,
mean?
it's such a good point, man. Yeah,
No?
it's because we just get caught up in the rat race, for
Yeah,
lack of a better term. Like, yeah, we don't
and our
prioritize things we should.
right, and our biggest excuse is we don't have time for it,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. So you're
It's
okay with being miserable, you
right.
know? Like,
It's not on the schedule, right?
yeah.
Um, and one thing I started doing over the years, at least the last like 3-4 years, is like I mentally have stuff scheduled, right? So I wake up, my drive into work, maybe about 15-20 minutes. That is my time, right? Where I mentally prepare for the day. I
Yeah.
mentally, and especially as like a police officer, we had this kind of this saying, one of my buddies put it point blank, is you go into work as a police officer in the uh, kind of the culture and climate that we had when I was working there. You had the feeling of impending doom,
Gosh.
right? And when it's verbalized and you feel it, like you put a label on it, right?
Yeah.
Um, it is the worst feeling, right?
Yeah.
Of the shuffle of the feet, right? The rat race, right? I gotta get up. I gotta go to work. Like
Right.
I gotta do this. I gotta pay my bills. I got and we schedule all these things out to be able to just survive,
I know.
right?
I know.
Versus live,
Yes.
right? And when you feel like it is for the survival of just existing, right? You're not making time for yourself to actually live your life how you want.
Right. Exactly. And it's mind blowing how easy it is to fall into that trap. We all do it. We're all guilty of it, prioritizing everything before ourselves, right? Putting, especially veterans and military community, because we're service oriented people as it is, right? So
Right.
we're putting everything before ourselves at the detriment to ourselves, which as a result actually affects other people in a negative way. It's so
Right.
weird how,
Yep.
it works like that, but it's true. Like, self-care is one of the best things you can do to help others around you as well. Like, it not only lifts you up, it lifts everybody else up because you're able to be present and be intentional with what you're doing, right? And not see every freaking thing you do as a chore or a survival task you have to do. And it's easier said than done, obviously, but
Yeah.
that should be the goal, is getting yourself to that point where you're not just surviving, like you're thriving and you have a way to frame things in a positive mindset, right? So that, yeah, you can impact positive change on other people too.
Yeah.
That's what I've really like leaned into lately, and it's made a huge difference.
Yeah.
Huge
Yeah. And
difference.
that's what happened. Like as a police officer, it still continues to happen. Right. And I especially felt it, even more so when I was going through like my dark times is, you go to work, right? As a police officer, any first responder, military guy, whatever.
Yep.
And you take all of your problems, you have to put them aside because you have to deal with other people's problems and figure life out for them, right?
Yep.
And they want all the answers right then and there in your first 30 second, show up on scene, and either it's chaotic or they're out of control 7-year old and they don't know how to parent, right? And they want you to parent their kid, right? And
Mhm.
whatever you're going through, right, you have to put it aside, deal with somebody else's problems. But then when you're driving home, right, it's still there,
Yeah,
right? It's
for
still
sure.
there. And one of the big things that I learned is, you know, is you're never going to be 100%, right? If you
Yeah.
say you're going to be 100%, if you do XYZ and you strive for perfection, or what happens when you're perfect? Perfect perfection, it doesn't
Yeah.
exist because
No.
you're limiting yourself to growth, right? If
Yeah.
you're saying that everything that you do when you get to this certain level is going to be perfect, right? You're already setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
Because what happens if
Exactly.
it's not exactly how you want it, right? It's not
Yep.
perfect, right?
Yeah.
You view yourself we're our biggest self-critics as a failure, right?
Yep.
And, I always say that, 100% effort equals success
Yeah. I agree.
because you continue to put as much as you can into the effort in what you're doing, and that's what's gonna allow you to excel.
Yeah, totally. Daily progress, right, is like one of the maybe even not even daily, like weekly progress, give
Right.
yourself a little grace is the path that you should be on. Yeah, perfection is what is it? Perfection is the enemy of good. I
Yeah.
mean, it's true.
Yeah.
You're never going to get there.
No, no, and the thought of, it being one of those things that you're going to achieve, right? Again, is creating that like false reality,
Yeah.
right? That you can achieve perfection, right? And there's a perfect person to idolize, right? And people get so stuck on the idolization of certain
Oh yeah.
individuals, right? And they start that, and that's where I talk about, and I try to break it down as best I can because some of the stuff that I come off the top of my head and talk about, whatever, if I don't break it down, people are just gonna be like, "You're an arrogant POS." Like,
I know what you mean. Yeah, I know what
like
you mean.
it's not, it's like taking those good pieces, right? Just like being a
Yeah.
good leader, you
Yeah.
know. But if you solely like idolize yourself and you start that comparison, right? And that's why I don't listen to other podcasts.
Yeah.
Right, because if I start comparing myself, and it's an interest thing, right? I don't find, it as interesting as being able to do some research on self-growth and
Yeah.
techniques and everything else. It comes down to an interest sometimes,
Yeah.
right? Um, but the biggest thing is that comparison, right? If I start then comparing myself to Jocko Willink, and
Right.
his show, or Bad Friends and their show. I know of them, and I've seen their clips and stuff like that, and I do my research, right, on the back end of Joe Rogan, right?
Right.
Joe Rogan had a following before he started a podcast.
Yeah.
It's very easy for you to become what is deemed by society as one of the greatest podcasters or greatest podcasts, on the earth when you have a following and you have a team and there's money backing and everything else, and you like
Yes.
slide into it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And they did that with, Jocko and all these other military, what's deemed as high level podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the sexy story, people want to hear, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And unfortunately, what has happened, and this comes from this morning's freaking uh, thing from Pastor Zach, is
Man, that was a good one.
this is a good one, man. I tell you,
Yeah.
right? He was talking about, Hollywood taking over, and we've talked about this of people in the military, right? And
Yep.
the stories morphing and evolving, and um, it doesn't just happen with the military. It goes back to like, back in my day, I walked uphill both ways to
Yeah,
school,
for
right?
sure.
The
Yep.
story gets embellished,
Yep.
right? Stories naturally get embellished when like you have to then you're in that comparison mode,
Yeah.
right? Of, well, it's my story's not as cool. Let me add a little twist to it, and it's like
Right.
it turns from like, oh, we're facing, two people, then we're facing 10 people, and
Yeah.
I mean, look at like Lone Survivor, right?
Yeah.
That story got so embellished to the point where Hollywood took it and put this complete wrong, like,
Absolutely.
narration on
Yeah.
accounts of what happened, right?
Yep.
Pat
Yep.
Tillman, right? And we're just
Yeah.
kind of specifically talking about military right now, but whatever narrative fits what sounds good and can become like sexy and make money,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Like, yeah,
And
it's too bad, honestly.
yeah, and
that-
I look at it this way: is those temptations will damn you in the end,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
at the end of the day, it's not society you have to worry about, right? It's
Yep.
yourself,
Yeah.
right?
For sure.
Because at the end of the day, do you feel good about it? Does it make you a good person?
Right. For
And that's,
sure.
and that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. I totally agree. And it's funny that you mentioned all those big, military influencer guys, whatever you want to talk about. Cause like, I mean, I full disclosure, I'm writing a book, about my mental health experience and stuff like that. It's going to be called Stigma. It's going to address all those freaking things we've been talking about, all the reasons why we don't think it's okay to get help. But anyways, that's a shameless plug for me. But on that note, I am potentially going down that road, right? Of being like a little more in the spotlight. And
Mhm.
it feels weird, but at the same time, like what I'm doing it for, it's not like I'm using my resume, right? Like as a
Right.
special forces guy and a 160th guy, like special operations guy, more for street cred, you
Right.
know? My story has nothing to do with like the badass stuff I did in combat. You know what I mean? It
Right.
has nothing to do with that. So like I don't know. I don't know like how that's received. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
From the military, like veteran community. Like it's a totally different lens that you got to look at it through though.
Yeah.
But
But I think one of the things that, and we talked about it already, right? Of self-criticism, but
yeah,
but also like how much are we going to allow like the outside to criticize us when we know it's good and true, right?
yes,
And we're doing
exactly.
it for the right reasons for ourselves and for others,
Yeah,
right? And it's a selfless service, mindset when we're going into it.
yep,
At the end of the day, it's that control alt delete,
yeah.
right?
Good point. Good
And
point.
when we do stuff or create stuff or we put stuff out there, we don't know what the journey completely is going to be, right?
Right.
I didn't know when I started Everlasting what I know now and where I would be at the point I am right now, right?
Yeah,
But as long as like as we grow, we stay true to why we started what we started,
yeah, yeah. I
right?
think that's so important. Yeah,
And I want to be clear, like I'm not knocking Jocko or Joe
no,
Rogan or anything like
yeah,
that. There are some stuff that arises, the Tim Kennedy interview or certain things that you gain insight into what's real, what's not, what's a adjusted false reality,
yeah,
or what's fluffed or whatever the case may be, right? That
yeah.
spins that sexy story to gain followers and likes and
Yep.
everything else. You can use your platform, right? And use your resume, right?
Yeah.
As a catapult, right?
Exactly.
For
Yeah. Yeah.
your overall mission. And
Right.
that is commendable, right?
Okay.
Because you're saying, "Hey, listen, I am, this tiered operator at this level, whatever the case may be. I'm done saying, you know, I don't want to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. And if you don't use your platform, right, you're creating that continued reinforcement of the stigma.
Yeah.
Do you know what
Good
I'm
point.
saying?
Good. Absolutely. And that's you basically just said my overall message right there, right? Like even at the tip of the spear, we're not invincible. We're all still humans. Like if it could happen to somebody like me who's gone through, intense training, resiliency training, really, like
Right.
it can happen to anybody and it's okay. Like that's really the core of my message. I really appreciate you saying that because that's like one thing that I really need to lean into, and
Yeah.
just be confident with what I'm like why I'm doing it, the why
Yeah.
behind what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the best advice I can give to anybody, because I stay true to it myself, is operating in a world of being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's good.
And if I continue to do that, right, and I do episode after episode and stuff like that, and eventually at some point it grows into like 1,200 episode, whatever the case may be. Um, and I keep pushing, right, and I continue to push myself personally and professionally, right, where I knew nothing about podcasting. I knew
Right.
nothing is the most uncomfortable feeling starting something from the ground up. You have a vision, right? But how do I get there?
Yeah.
You got to show up and put the work in,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point, and stick with it too, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm sure, I mean, I don't know your experience, but I'm sure the first couple episodes, like, you didn't have the following you had now, you know what I mean?
Right.
So you have to
Yeah.
keep doing it and not just say, "Oh, I tried that, I'm done," right?
Yep.
Like,
No, there was
yeah,
times I wanted to quit,
I
right?
bet.
There was times I wanted to quit. Like, why am I doing this? You know, like things aren't getting put out there as how I want them. Sometimes my audio was crap. My first episode, I took like 100 takes on it because I felt like I
Mhm.
needed to write down and script everything, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And I wasn't, it was good in a sense as far as getting flowing what's in my head onto paper, right? But I wanted perfection. I
right.
wanted it
I
to
get
sound
it,
perfect. I
especially
wanted
if you're putting it out, right, to the world.
right.
Like, yeah,
I wanted perfection, right?
yeah,
And it goes back to nothing's perfect.
right.
I now have episodes sometimes where, like, I'll go into, like, a straight coughing fit, right, because of my breathing issues,
Yeah,
but, like, now I, like, prepare myself and I, like, basically take a whole inhaler to the face before because you don't think about that, right?
mhm,
You're I'm blowing hot air into this microphone, right, and
yeah,
exhausting, pushing my lung capacity past, like, what is comfortable sometimes,
yeah,
right? And I'll get done with this and I'll go up and I'll go hit the strong steroid inhaler, right? People don't see that stuff behind the scenes, right?
good
And I
point.
don't and
Yep,
sometimes I don't talk about it, like, I don't talk about it all the time, right? But when it's relevant to a genuine conversation,
yeah,
right? And that's my biggest thing, and I wanna stay true to that is that genuine back and forth conversation, right?
yeah,
And, the reason why it doesn't come up all the time because I don't have, like, a script that I go off of. I have a genuine conversation with, somebody that's remote or somebody that's in studio, and, the point and the message that overall overarching for Everlasting Veteran is have that genuine conversation, podcast or not, with
yeah,
your brother and sister to your left and your right. And if
yeah,
I can do it on a podcast and continue to spread that message in every single episode of a genuine conversation, why can't you do it when they're sitting next to you and you're not recording?
yeah, man. That's heavy.
Because
That's good though.
because when the headphones come off and I stop talking into this mic, I may have like an off day. I may have like a dark moment, you
Yeah,
know? It is
that's
entirely possible. Like even though I'm talking about it right now, I'm still actively going through it. I will continue to manage and things will be more manageable,
yeah,
right? But
absolutely.
that's the whole point of growth and not striving for perfection because that you're striving for a false reality.
No, that's so true, man. And because I'm the same way. Like I still have my dark moments and dark days, but it's really the biggest change is how I see it now, right? Because now I know what it is. I'm not running from it, right? And I can identify it and just say, dang, that sucks, but it's okay, right? Like,
Right.
whereas before I would hyper focus on it and just freaking, what's wrong with me? How do I fix this? And just reinforce that thought, and yeah, like we're probably gonna deal with it the rest of our lives, but it's just a matter of managing it, right? And our perspective towards it and being okay with it, you know?
Yeah.
Like that's ultimately what it comes down to is just accepting, knowing what it is and being okay with it. Like,
Yeah. Well, and
yeah,
setting realistic expectations for ourselves
yeah,
when we do manage it, right?
for sure.
And when something doesn't go like, maybe right now, like how we're doing things works, right? And then we try continuing doing the same thing and it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And then we keep repeating that over and over, right? It's the definition of insanity, right? Being
Hmm.
repeating the same thing over and over, expecting a different result, right?
Yeah.
And we have to understand that even our expectations and how we manage it, is going to continue to grow and morph, as the days progress, because what we're doing now may not be something that is feasible, or maybe there's a better way to do it down the road. And so then our expectation of handling something, has to be willing to change. We have to be willing to be able to morph and evolve, as the days progress, to make
Yeah.
sure that we're continuing to show up and put the work in.
Exactly. And also not get pissed off when something doesn't work, because when I was first starting my journey to actually get better, I tried the talk therapy, I tried the breathing techniques, I tried all those things and they weren't working. And I was just getting pissed. I was just like, I'm doing everything right. Like, what the hell? Why am I not seeing the progress? Right.
Right.
And like, but now I just know like those things are tools, but they're not going to cure it. Whereas before my mindset was like, I'm doing everything, it should be cured. Right. So yeah,
Yeah.
like it's just perspective on all those things.
Yeah. Well, and I break it down like this too. I like breaking it down to like realistic situations, right? You have a car, you have to change the oil, you have to put gas in it for it to keep going, right? You have to change the tires, you have to do maintenance on a vehicle, right? And sometimes like you can't do it yourself, you have to bring it to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing with self-care, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we can't do it all by ourselves, right? Or time doesn't allow us to be able to take the time to work on that car, right? Work on it ourselves. We have to drop it off and allow somebody else to take over. We have to
Yep.
do the same thing in our lives, right? Where we have to lean on others for that support because it allows us to not be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right?
That's great.
And, when we bring ourselves, right, to the mechanic, right, which it could either be a friend you're talking to, right,
Yep.
or actually a professional help or whatever the case may be, when we bring ourselves to that point, right, to conduct self-maintenance, right, and fill up our gas tank a little bit more. Maybe it doesn't get full because,
Right. Right.
maybe that day we don't have the funds, and the funds are, the energy, right?
Yeah.
We don't have the energy to fill the tank completely, but we're able to get to, half a tank,
Yeah.
right? And, you start kind of breaking down life and um managing the maintenance, right? And the expectations you're gonna get out of it. And then that's when you slowly start to regain control of the variables in your life
Yeah.
is, okay, because if you fill up your tank completely, but you have a flat tire, right?
Yeah.
Your car's still not going to go down the road.
Yeah.
So you
Good
have to
point.
pick and choose sometimes of, you know, that's the thing with self-care. It's not just one thing, it's everything, right?
Yeah.
In order to continue down the road. You know,
Yeah, man.
that's kind of the best way I can kind of break it down for anybody to understand,
Yeah.
and that's how my mind works. And if I'm able to share that with people, and even when you're writing your book, one of the like suggestions I would say, because I do this with myself, and I too in the process of writing a book,
Awesome.
um, and I wrote down my thoughts, uh, lonely on a midnight shift, of what I'm going through in that moment, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling,
Yeah.
everything else, and it's just like notes, right, to refer back to of being in that moment, you
Yeah.
know, and whether it's a good thought, bad thought, whatever the case may be. Um, but we can easily forget, right? How far we've come and the amount of work we've put in, right?
Yeah.
And if we write down like what our successes and what our struggles are, in that moment, you know, we can look back and go, man, I forgot that 5 years ago, I was going through it, and a year ago, things clicked, right? I
Yeah.
forgot I've been going through it for so long,
Right.
that it allows us to give ourselves our own perspective on our successes, our triumphs, our lows and everything else, and it allows us to kind of bring it back to zero when we think that we're spinning our wheels, which in fact we're not. You know,
Right.
if we
Right. You're
remind ourselves,
making, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we remind ourselves of that growth that we've had. You know, it allows us to be a better critic
Yep.
on ourselves. It allows us
Yeah.
to appreciate where we've come from.
Exactly. And I will even go as far as to say if whoever's listening to this right now, like, congratulations, for being willing to listen to stuff like this, because that's a reflection of self-growth as well, like just hearing two veterans talk about, mental health, like that's awesome, man. Like think about that 20 years ago. That didn't even exist, So yeah, even this, what we're doing right now is amazing, right? Like
Yeah,
I couldn't imagine myself doing this 5 years ago. Like
yeah,
no way in hell,
yeah,
like it's just mind blowing. So yeah, the good put things in perspective. That's such a good message on that.
yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. We definitely can unpack more. But I think this is a good positive kind of footing to land ourselves for this episode. And I just want to say thank you, Nick, to coming on, sharing part of your story. And we'll be able to unpack more in another episode, and people will be able to tune into that. And if anybody wants to send me an email, everlastingveteranct@gmail.com. I love getting insight. I love getting perspective. I get emails all the time. And it just, that is the most self-fulfilling thing, to be able to hear the trickle down effect that I never thought was going to happen, of like a mom or dad or a brother or somebody, emailing me and going, I listened to that and I understand them a little bit more. And I was able to have that conversation. I was able to create that connection. I was able to do this because I was able to gain that perspective, And so to those people, I say thank you, because it means a lot. It means a lot, to what I'm doing, who I am, and everything that I've started with Everlasting Veteran 2 years ago. It's the journey, man. It really comes down to that. So,
Yeah.
well, we will conclude this, and I just want to say thank you again, Nick, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I do want to shameless plug my new YouTube channel just because
Oh
I
yeah,
have the
throw it out there,
opportunity to.
man.
So it's all about financial topics for veterans, right? And I'm going to do some mental health. So it's called Thrive with Nick. It's brand new. So I literally have one video up right now, but weekly we'll be coming out with either some financial wisdom for veterans specifically or some mental health, kind of lessons learned from my own story. So the whole goal is just to help veterans, and create a community if possible. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I know what our next episode is going to be on. We're diving anything and everything financial, and being
Love it.
able to create a good footing coming out of the military. That was
Yeah.
one thing. We didn't we talked about a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But I find that this is through many conversations, right? And it goes back to, not one answer, not one way of doing things, and using these as a tools in the toolbox,
Yeah.
and financial stability and financial freedom of sorts to be able to understand where you're at and where you want to go, to be able to grow in that aspect is so crucial
Yeah.
coming out of the military as well.
Yep.
And I congratulate you on your success so far in your journey. You're not done. That's
Yeah.
for sure. And
Thank you.
I think that's where we'll leave it. That's going to be the
Yeah.
next episode we do. We'll dive into the finances with Nick,
Yeah. That'll be
and
awesome.
and
Yeah.
be able to
We
do
can
that,
get,
man.
yeah, we can get a lot of value out of that for sure.
Yeah,
That'll be,
absolutely.
that'll be fun.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Well, I appreciate you, Nick, and I appreciate everybody listening. This is Ryan Landry, the host of the Everlasting Veteran Podcast, joined with Nick O'Kelly. And make sure you go check out his new YouTube page, and we'll be talking soon. And everybody have a great day.